Shit, this wasn't my last time. So not too long ago, probably when this video comes out, it would have been like a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, I made a video about why Dana White should leave the UFC, in my opinion. And I had a 46% like ratio, so I had more dislikes than I liked, which seems that people disagree with me, but you know, I put my thoughts out there, people can do what they want with that. So in today's video, we're diving into the topic that might rub some people the wrong way, but something that's been on my mind and honestly on the mind of a lot of UFC fans. Joe Rogan has been a staple of the UFC for over 2 decades, but it might be time for him to step away from the commentary booth. Yeah man, I said it. Today I'm breaking down why Joe Rogan should leave the UFC. Before we jump in, let me be 100% clear with you, okay? Joe Rogan is a legend in just MMA. Okay, he's been calling fights since 97, I'm pretty sure, for a long time. He was the voice of the UFC, him and Bruce Buffer, and Joe was a big part of the sport blowing up as big as it did today. But as the sport has evolved, so have the demands of top tier commentary. There's loads of people on the commentary desk who outshine Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's pretty much there just for the oohs and the ahs after someone gets a big cool ass knockout. Okay, don't get me wrong, that's cool, but someone else can fill that job, you know what I'm saying? So let's talk about why Joe Rogan's time might be up and why it would actually be a good thing for the UFC to not cut ties with him. You know, the UFC shouldn't fire him, okay, that's just disrespectful, but I feel like it's just better if he wasn't there, you know what I'm saying? First, let's talk about Rogan's commentary style. Back in the early days of the UFC, his excitement and passion for the sport was borderline infectious. Rogan wasn't just a commentator, he was a fan who knew his stuff. He educated people, he was loud, enthusiastic and incredibly knowledgeable. In a time where MMA was still in its early stages, he helped educate fans about the intricacies, I said that word completely wrong, but you know what I'm saying, of the sport. His insight into the jiu-jitsu specifically was great for fans, okay? But in recent years, Rogan's commentary style has felt outdated. It's not that he's bad, but we've seen the same reactions, the same catchphrases, the calf kick being mentioned a million times about how Benson Henderson pioneered it, and sometimes the same level of misunderstanding when it comes to modern techniques and fighters. His tendency to hyper-focus on specific narratives, especially when it comes to grappling or his favourite fighters, can get frustrating for viewers who want a fair, nuanced, unbiased breakdown of the action. Look, the UFC has grown massively in the past 20 years, and the sport has evolved in ways we wouldn't even imagine back in the late 90s. I don't know why I'm saying me, I wasn't born then, but Rogan's style of commentary hasn't evolved with it. There are times when he gets fixated on a single aspect of the fight and misses the bigger picture, or he wants to spread his narrative about how fights shouldn't be, you know, every round shouldn't start standard, okay? Rogan's extremely biased towards grapplers. He can sometimes push a narrative that doesn't align with what's actually happening in the octagon and can misinform people or even trick people about a state of a fight. And the second reason I got is less passion and less focus. Next up is something a lot of us have noticed. Joe doesn't seem as passionate about the UFC anymore. Let's be real, the guy's got a lot going on between his massively successful podcast, his comedy career, which is shit. Okay, hey bro, I'm sorry, right? A little tangent right now. The amount of funny people that go into commentary and they just aren't funny, man. Like, because you know they go there trying to be funny. Like, if you go into a commentary show, you're trying to be funny. It don't fucking work, man. Okay, fuck. But anyway, at his various other adventures, it's clear that the UFC isn't his number one priority, and it doesn't have to be. Okay, but it shows. Back in the day, Rogan was all in on the UFC. Like I said before, you could feel his excitement through the screen, but these days, feels like he's phoning it in at times. He doesn't travel for every event anymore, he's not always at the big fights, and honestly, it seems like a grind of calling fights just isn't what it used to be for him. There's a difference between the Rogan we heard in the 2000s and the Rogan we hear now. It's understandable. Everyone's priorities shift over time, but when you're calling the biggest fights in the world, you need to be 100% focused, passionate, and locked in. Lock in. If Joe's heart isn't in the way it used to be, maybe it's time to let someone else step up and bring that fire to the mic. You know, the cooler commentator. You know what I'm saying? But Joe, he honestly just seems like a guy who's been watching the sport for for a very long time, and you know, loved those moments. But all really Joe can bring to the desk nowadays is he can mention a random fight in the early 2000s that had a cool moment or something like that. The third reason I have is decline in objectivity and Joe just being extremely biased. One of the biggest complaints we've heard from fans is Joe Rogan's growing lack of objectivity. Now this isn't entirely new, you know, Rogan's always had his favorite fighters, and we've all heard him hype up certain guys during broadcasts, you know, sucking them off, like just literally glazing them like crazy. But honestly, in recent years, it feels like it's gotten so much worse. Whether it's pushing certain narratives about fighters' backgrounds or hyping up a fighter based on past performances rather than seeing what's happening in the cage. I think the perfect example is when Israel Adesanya fought Jan Blachowicz and Izzy got absolutely outclassed for 5 rounds, but all Joe could talk about that entire fight is how Jan was biting on Izzy's feints. Okay, like what the fuck? And when you're watching a fight and the commentary doesn't match what's happening in front of your eyes, it can get frustrating, it can get annoying. And for people who are less educated, they can even be tricked by Joe, because Joe is sort of a trusted guy, you know, he's been around for a long time, he's a very famous man. If you're watching your first UFC event and you think a guy is winning, but Joe tells you, oh no, that's not happening, you can be manipulated. I'm not saying this is purposeful, but come the fuck on. And compare that to some of the newer voices we're hearing in the commentary booth. Not DC. DC's extremely bad for wrestlers. I fuck with DC heavy, but come on. But you've got people like Paul Felder, right, who for me is great at giving, you know, breakdowns while not being biased. You've got people like John Anik, who for me is the best commentator in UFC history by far. These people stay objective and call the fight as it happens without playing favourites. Rogan's bias, whether intentional or not, can skew how fans perceive a fight. When you're calling the biggest moments in UFC history, you need to give the audience an accurate or unbiased view of what's going on. And if you can't do that consistently, it's time to reconsider your role. Now the fourth reason I have is there's room for new voices, okay? I ain't a John Gooden fan, but I think he arguably gives more than Joe Rogan gives. Like I said before, you've got Paul Felder. DC for me does what Joe does the exact same thing that Joe does. He's also extremely biased and has the same faults as DC, but for me, Joe doesn't distinguish himself because DC's literally there and DC literally does the exact same thing on a more regular basis nowadays, okay? Like, come on. We've got, and Laura Senko ain't even half bad herself. I know a lot of people hate on her, you know what I'm saying? I get it, bit of a whiny voice, but come the fuck on. It's not that we're replacing Joe Rogan, it's that the UFC needs to continue to grow and evolve like it did when Joe first joined. Sport has changed and commentary teams should reflect that, okay? We need an accurate commentary team that is just doing the fucking job. And then the fifth reason I got, it's actually me giving him some credit. Guy's legacy sealed. Now I want to make one thing clear. Joe Rogan's legacy in the UFC is semi-buffer, and no one can ever take that away from him. He's had legendary calls, unforgettable moments, and he's played a huge role in making MMA as popular as it is today. But sometimes it's okay to step away. Rogan's name will always be synonymous with UFC fans, whether he's in the booth or not. By leaving now, he preserves that legacy, instead of just being remembered as a guy who fucking went on about how people's legs are toast from one calf kick, or just going on about how people are biting on Israel Adesanya's feints, or whatever the fuck, you know, giving up his stupid rules that he comes out with on his podcast. Like, what the fuck, bro? He comes out with some shit. I'm sorry. He comes out with some shit like fucking rules, man. Like, Jesus, I know that's a bit off topic, but come on, man. You know what I'm saying? So in conclusion, there it is, man. Those are my reasons why Joe Rogan needs to leave the UFC. It's not about disrespecting what he's done, but listen, man, no person is above the sport, and if I think you're bringing it down in certain cases, I must say that I think you gotta go, man. Okay, but I do, you know, I do fuck with Joe Rogan heavy. Hopefully this video does a bit better in the like department, you know what I'm saying? But if you enjoyed, like, subscribe, do all that. Much love, man, in a bit.